Shinji and Warhammer40k. Chapter 49. A True Ending. Part 1. When Second Impact happened, the surviving governments of the world were driven into preparing for something like it ever happening again, despite the sheer unlikelihood of it happening again. That was the reason why many cities had names with numbers attached to the end of them. Some were moved inland, others made new and reinforced against disasters. Unfortunately, the Angel War proved that not only was the event capable of happening again, it could happen again and again. So when humanity started halving again, this meant there was less chaos due to there being an excess of food and resources. 4 billion down to 2 billion. But it wasn't a clean halving of humanity. Rebuilt capital cities and historical and religious sites were the first to be cleansed, something about having a metaphysical weight. Like New York City too, given that old Manhattan was already underwater. Like the area in and around the Vatican. Mecca. Also Las Vegas for some reason. The only one that was untouched was Tokyo 3. The only country that had its population completely intact was Japan. That wasn't fortunate, that was just too damn suspicious. Going from 4 to 2 billion still meant starvation and chaos in the long term. Crops rotted in the field, trucks and trains and ships were without skilled operators. Factories lay empty from lack of workers and/or lack of demand. Governments and public systems were made of people suddenly much less enthused to keep trying after such massive losses, such a grand scale of death that made everything they've worked so hard for in the past 16 years an exercise in futility. Despair choked the world. Luckiest were those who were allowed to die. But the world kept on turning, and of those that remained, still enough struggled to maintain a sense of the new normal in a world where there was no escape, even in death. Kodama Haraki to the emergency room. Kodama Haraki, please proceed to the emergency room. Kodama Haraki, eldest of the Haraki sisters, looked up from her work. The walls had grown dark, the corridors long. She sighed and moved away from folding bedsheets. She was an artist, but the loss of Tokyo 3 meant her employers also largely vanished. The whole economy was in flux. The entertainment business was down. The one sector that surprisingly got a massive boost was medical and hospital care. After all, now that no one would ever die, everybody had to deal with the constant pain of living. Kodama didn't have any serious background in medical care, but as a former resident of Tokyo 3, she was valuable as much as other people considered her bad luck. The lights flickered at her approach, and remained steady as she passed by. Patients and other workers glanced nervously at her as she moved through the halls, none daring to meet her eyes. Dr. Kazuhito Go had been in the practice for over 30 years now. It wasn't any more like the wild days of just after Second Impact, when even university professors with a modicum of knowledge of anatomy, like, say, Kozo Futsuki, a professor of metaphysics, were called upon to perform surgery. He thought there was nothing he could fear anymore. He was wrong. It was supposed to be just another routine birthing. For everyone who'd given up in a world suddenly emptied again, there were also those who, rather than fearing bringing new life into this world that could end at any moment, wanted to feel being a parent while they still were able. Some people still had this naive hope that if humanity could pull through from Second Impact, they could survive this too. He remembered that as much as modern society saw greater equality from women being absolutely necessary in all jobs for a productive national workforce, some countries regressed and had elements basically kidnapping women to put into forced population increased rape camps. And now with this unnatural existence in which people simply could no longer die, he'd heard of parents simply allowing their infants to scream into exhaustion, starving them into silence, or even just suffocating them into a living dead coma. If they weren't dead, there was no harm, right? And if the kids grew up with brain damage, well, it's not like the chances of them all growing up in this world in the first place was any good, right? Maybe? The doctor sighed as he put on his sanitary gloves. People weren't inherently good, this he believed. They were cowards and brutes at heart. The ugliness in the human heart is exposed easily once they find someone helpless and unwilling to act back in return. Dehumanization was easy. But because people were cowards, sometimes it took only one person daring to stand up to decency to coy a crowd. One person becomes two, becomes many, as people wake up from their bystander paralysis. There were so many ways to compel people into action through terror, ironically now that they no longer had to fear death. Being dismembered, being kept awake, being buried alive. Now that people no longer needed to hold back in fights as much, the hospital saw more incidents of brutality that largely could only be cured by putting people in corrective restraints and waiting for the immortality to bring them back from the brink. But pain relief medication and bed space was expensive. People were ironically much more paranoid about being injured now, because while death could save a person from the consequences of their actions, death relentlessly follows the living. It was much scarier to be alive, right? The lights flickered. He looked up for a moment, then back down to the operating table. A child stared up at him. A child with corpse-like pallor and hollowed eyes. The room, despite the strong lights of the operating table, seemed to grow darker and colder and contracted into itself. Monitor screens flicked into hard, screaming static. The child stood right in front of him, in between his arms and the pregnant woman's own open legs. Terror shoved itself hard into his brain. The assisting nurse shrieked as the screen showed a woman with long, stringy red hair that hung over her face, exposing only a wet, bloodless chin and blackened teeth. The child screamed into his face, and the doctor was assaulted with this sweet-rotting smell of an old corpse. He screamed back in return and fell down on his back. Normally it would have struck him as terribly stupid. People inside horror films don't just run away when they see this terrible thing ambling slowly at them, or attacking in turn a creepy child or scary ghost woman, instead of just sitting there paralysed in terror. But that was the point. Humans had a fight-or-flight instinct, and some people were wired towards fight more than flight. But if something were truly supernatural, it could just turn off the fight part of the brain. The lights flickered again. Now inside the room, the doctor and the assisting nurse were cowering in a corner. A bony woman with long dripping hair all covering her face, hunched spider-like over them, trapping them. Her head jerked unnaturally now and then. The child was standing in front of the pregnant woman's open legs, turned around and staring into her bloody, quivering womanhood. It reached out as if it wanted to spitefully remove this new life from the world, a world that denied the chance for its own life. Then the door slammed open, and bright white light flooded into the oppressive gloom. "Fuck off!" Kadama Haraki screamed into the room. The spectres screeched and scrambled away. Screens stopped being static and displayed medical information again. The lamps began shining at full power again. The shadows faded, the terrible figures vanishing in between the eye blinks. The pregnant woman, paralysed with fear from earlier, now could only whisper and wail from what she'd gone through. The nurse shakily got back to her feet and went over to comfortingly hold her hand and made soothing words. It would be all right. Dr. Gold looked down at his quivering hands, then towards the young woman by the door. Shame and rage filled his whole being. In the end, he too wasn't so smart as to rule his own mind. He looked around the room. There was no sign the event had actually happened. The term for this strange new condition was the collective psychomimetic trauma mass hallucinatory syndrome. Kadama Haraki stood there, so proud, and somehow all the more solid and real in a world that felt false. The young woman had her shoulder-length hair swept around her half-rimmed eyeglasses, exposing a fairly large and smooth forehead. She wore a white shirt with a brown apron. It was enough vulnerability to make her look approachable and desirable, but the pitiless expression on her face ruined all that. The only things that were real and true were in the vicinity of those who came out of Tokyo free. Dreams and nightmares were leaking out into reality, but some places were just more anchored than others. The world was unfair, but never before had it been so malicious. The doctor got up and said, "Thank you, Miss Haraki. That will be all. You may go now." Kadama nodded. She didn't miss the mix of gratefulness and resentment in his eyes. It wasn't fair to have your soul flayed open, exposing your weakness and animal fear, and then someone else so completely unaffected by that, coming in making you feel like even more of a coward. She turned around and left them to continue back with their real work. "Why do you look so tired?" a nurse sneered at her as she returned to the lobby. "It's not like you're the one who has to see and feel these things. Damn brain ghosts and damn nerve scum. Just hurry up. That's all we need from you people." Kadama paused in mid-stride. Very slowly she turned around. Am I really supposed to take that sort of abuse?" "They're all so tired. They're all so scared. You could understand that." "What? You want to make something of it? You're nothing but a leech, profiting off the fears of good people." "As opposed to profiting off their pain, I suppose. How very useful you are compared to me. Drugging people is such a solution to their problems. Nursing work largely now consisted of giving the patients all the sedatives. People didn't come to hospitals to heal, they went there to get rid of their pain. If it wasn't for the rampant negativity and unguarded thoughts leaking out nightmares into reality, all hospitals would be filled with nothing but drugged out, unproductive patients. She just had no more sympathy to give for any of that. The nurse reached out to slap Kodama, but the former graphic artist simply blocked the blow with her left hand and slapped the nurse in return with the other. The nurse staggered back and clutched her cheek. You hit me! She began to look around and scream at the other nurses and patients. Did you see that? She hit me! Yes, I did. Dominance was expressed in social situations from being able to insult anyone and get away with it. It was all just a purposeless game. While it was typically considered that it was men who solved things with violence, among feuding women it was actually faster to resort to physical confrontation. Slaps and such was just an extension of the argument, and whoever resorted to it first was the loser. You're going to pay for that, you evil woman! Everybody here's a witness! Kodama turned around to stare at her. She had a tight smile. Bitch, please. I was there when the angels made the streets run red. If nightmares are scared of me, why should I be scared of you? You nasty woman! So really, you do think you're better than the rest of us, huh? You're the reason things like this are happening! Kodama Haraki scoffed. It was still a hospital, so she couldn't exactly smoke in there. She no longer felt any outrage at such things. After being turned away from so many jobs, after so much rampant, superstitious ungratefulness, she'd long lost any more shits to give. She felt only hollow inside, despite being one of the few people who fixed reality around her feet. We're the reason things like this stop happening, pay attention. I'm not a part of Nerve. I'm just a civilian who was there when gods died. And it looks like that's enough. There's this thing at the back of every human's mind, afraid of everything that's not natural. Not normal. That's why we're seeing all this supernatural bullshit. It doesn't mean those who see it are weaker. It means all those of us who are still here in this fucking place waiting for our family to come back. It means we have a connection to those stronger souls, carried away on the back of living gods. I'm only important because I'm the big sister of someone who was in the same damn homeroom as the pilots. This is a hospital, but it's a temple to humanity now. And I'm a goddamn Miko now, banishing Yurei. I mean, where does that even begin to make sense? Get out! Just get out! How dare you! Go back to your corner until you're needed! You're nothing good! You're a curse! The lights flickered around Kodama, and that nurse stepped back in fright. Then she mullishly raised her chin, as if daring the woman from Tokyo 3 to do something. To abandon her duty to save others from themselves. Kodama nodded slowly. Yep. Okay, I'm done with this. I quit. The nurse's eyes widened. First with shock, then with fear, then with fierce glee. Well, that just proves it. You're not a good person at all. See, everyone? She's just a selfish, shameless woman. I'm a civilian contractor. I don't have any duty to anyone. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a doctor. There's no obligation for me to care about people who don't want me around. Tell your boss I'm not coming back here without double the appearance fee. Kodama kept going and out the door. She ignored the looks of hate and fulfilled moral superiority of the others now they had chased away someone from that accursed city. They felt in some way more powerful. And then their fear began to stain the walls again. She left the hospital without turning her head back at any point. It was callous, it was insulting, it made her look like a selfish mercenary. Kodama Haraki yawned and stretched out. This was why she and the others always asked for payment in advance. Good business. There was one hell of a demand and a limited supply. Outside waiting for her was a pair of government agents. She refused to wear the armband marking her as a former Tokyo 3 resident. Rather than mark her for her safety, in a world without death, people like her were such tempting targets for kidnapping and torture, and whatever humiliations they could inflict upon her as revenge for the fear that now choked the earth. She looked northeast towards the empty hollow that was once the Hakone Valley. She could see dim grey shapes up in the sky. Those weren't birds. Those were angels, aimlessly drifting. Unlike the varied shapes and combat forms that the previous angels possessed, these ones had a more uniform, but faintly boring appearance, like that of a white puppet with blades for hands and feet. If nerve returned, any or all of them could wake up and transform and go back to killing anything and everything again. What a pain in the ass, she muttered. On one hand, an end to this pain and anguish. On the other hand, the familiar terror of extinction. She is a savage! Get her out of here! Screamed the woman of the child Nozomi beat up. Yeah, that's valid. Kodama nodded slowly and then turned to stare at her sister. What the hell, Nozomi? The school is full of grots, hiding things, putting stinky stuff in school shoes, writing gold die on desks. They think they can get away with doing that to my boys as long as no one knows who's done it. If I can't punish those in the class, I'ma punish them all for just letting it happen. Nobody bullies my boys. The little girl slammed her tiny fists on the desk and cutely snarled out, We should take this school and make it all right and proper. The principal turned to Kodama and said, As you can see, your sister is being very disruptive. We have already been very generous in accepting students from Tokyo 3 here, but if they flaunt the rules and be violent, then they have no place here. Kodama looked out the window to the defaced courtyard with a grinning green skull painted on it. Children were marching around it, carrying long sticks and improvised tomahawks on their belts as they staged a walkout protest from their classrooms. Then she put her face onto her palms. Why is my little sister now practically the reincarnation of Nobunaga? Why? 'Cause we're the boys and you's not! Is this the way you raise your children? The woman barked at Kodama. Only violent thugs come from that place. Kodama looked up. She smiled thinly. Gods come from that place. Come on, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that we still have one round moon, instead of 3 stuck together like candy. That doesn't change anything. If you all act like such entitled, arrogant brutes, you should be treated like one. You're not owed any respect just because you come from that place. I suppose you're right. Listen, I'm not a doctor or a lawyer or scientist. My background's in art. But this is my job now, so I can say this. It's all that negativity that's making it worse. As insane as it may sound, orchism is apparently a valid religion now, and where kids are allowed to act out, psychomimetic trauma just goes away, even if they're not from Tokyo 3. Kodama raved nonchalantly. Children literally are our hope for the future. I know it sounds bad that it looks like we're heading to a might-makes-right society where a few are exalted over the others and the rule of law will collapse if some people are immune to it. But we saw Nerve fight an actual god, and when they took her away, death went away with her. So I think we can actually sue for religious discrimination here. I'm pretty sure preventing my sister and her friends from organising is constitutionally illegal somewhere. They stared at her. That is the most insane thing I have ever heard. We regret... The principal paused and continued. No, there is no regret. This school is not a place for such lawlessness. Miss Araki, I must inform you that little Nozomi here is to be expelled for the safety of other students. Kodama sighed. Yeah, I can't really object much to that either. My sis is totally, as they say, big nuts. She could sympathise a bit with their pains and the instinctive reaction to draw away from freakish abnormality, trying to cling to the remnants of their safe world. Kodama actually thought that Nozomi could do better than to be forced to conform. The little girl was mad enough in her orcish faith that instead of fixing reality around her, it became more malleable. But it would be terribly unsafe to leave her at home alone. Hikari, the middle child of the Haraki sisters, was still away to the unknown. Kodama supposed she could take her youngest sister out for her jobs, but it'd be hard on the little tyke. She'd still be tired, bored, and away from her friends. The little girl only looked up and grinned. There was nothing like a little girl's absolute surety in her beliefs. A child believes something totally and emotionally. It was just that they could stop and believe in something else just as equally as that they grew bored. But the boys were not a playtime group. They were a collective, an actual organised subculture. You think you can get away with whatever you want now, don't you? But no matter how much he's hating or he's hurting, you're forgetting one thing. She whispered and leaned forward. They're gonna come back. Everyone else, except those who lived through the crucible that was Tokyo 3, flinched. You think that now that no one speaks for us, you lot can push us down. You're many and you're big, and we're so little. But nobody dies. Nobody dies. So when they come back, we remember. We're going to remember everything you did to us while they were away. And then there was a distant rumble. The sky turned red for just a moment. Everyone looked outside, and a horrified realization began to drape over the faces of the adults. And Nozomi's already feral grin turned all-devouring. Oh, look at that. They're back! Somewhere in the Gobi Desert. April 1st, 2016. There was a bright flash and a boom, and a spot in the dry, featureless desert was replaced by a sunken ring of snow-covered hills and forests. Mountain slopes were cut clevenly in a perfect circle, and had fused into solidity by searing heat. It was like they went through a ring of fire, now straight into a baking oven thousands of kilometers wide. The snow began melting immediately. Then above it dropped an island-sized beast of flesh and spines. Oddly enough, with its bright purple patterns, looked something in between a worm and a flower. Mountain tops crumbled beneath its weight. It screamed out. And then pre-targeted megaton warheads began raining down. It screamed out in pain as the detonations flashed overhead. Boiling flesh, shattering interlaced layers of bone and chitting, setting fire to everything else. Sand turned to glass. Deep inside the geofront, everyone inside clung to their seats or to each other as hellfire raged around them, and the hammer of the gods shattered everything around the red dome underneath the beast. Asuka grit her teeth and burned from the inside. Poison coursed through her veins and blood dripped out her lips. Boom, 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 boom! For almost 2 minutes, they hammered the arrival site until the desert itself was shrouded in hot, radar-opaque mist. Long-forgotten systems in the Black Moon thrummed to life. It was, after all, originally designed as a terraforming device. The blast burned all the oxygen in the air, but to feed the inside of the geofront, the sphere created fresh, sweet air out of nothing. But the geofront was not the only thing buried underground. Bunkers opened out into a scorching hell. Fully environmentally sealed APCs trundled out. Multi-role fighters sorted overhead. The white mist began to flash brilliant shades of blue from the inside. The monster island screamed. Then a beam of white-hot death shot out towards the horizon. Explosions rippled in the distance. The monster island stepped out with lobster legs and a flared lobster tail, but still with a worm-like main body. Eyes opened out all along its length. Rows of red eyes blinked and then shot out lasers. The living fortress laced brilliant lines of death across the sky and across the desert plains. "Oh, this is a terrible idea!" someone screamed from a distant command centre. "Why'd we listen to Katsuragi?" Leaving aside how they just now attempted their best to kill her. It was like people kept underestimating Nerve just because they survived all those impossible attacks over and over and over again. But miracles weren't supposed to be easy. Absolutely no one expected something else to be in the way trying to kill Nerve by itself, and then so offended by accidentally being its shield, that it sought to destroy the interruption before it could go back to the task of cracking open the geofront like an egg and slurping up the delicious insides. "Shit! They're getting slaughtered out there!" Masato Katsuragi shouted as the last of the teleport dizziness faded. "What's the situation with the pilots?" "Soyuz life signs are erratic. Evangelion Unit 2 has been poisoned. Corrosion is spreading." "Hamagishi is—" Mayumi's screaming filled the command center. "Her vitals are stable, but she's not hearing us." Masato nodded. Plug suits could be remotely activated to restart an unconscious pilot's heart with a built-in defibrillator. "Low power only. Get her attention." Mayumi Yamagishi yelped and realised that Unit 1 Lilith's gaping maw was no longer about to bite her head off. Its eyes were still moving, staring intensely at her, but it was frozen in place. Same as her Evangelion, though at least she could move her arms a little bit. "Unit 03 here," she reported. "I'm immobilised. What do I do now?" She flinched from the shaking of the ground around her and the monster island's powerful as it spat out a glob of glowing energy. The orb shot out to the distance, and then more mushroom clouds rose high over the desert. "Unit 2 is down and the enemy's killing our reinforcements. You're the only one that can do something about this now. Can you try to free yourself?" Masato ordered. "The lance just narrowly avoided hitting the core," Ritsuko noted. But if Unit Lilith becomes active again, we're all going to die. So be careful. Mayumi grimaced pitifully. It was time to be a hero, to be the hope of the world. The other pilots, what sort of monsters were they to be able to carry this terrifying load for so long? Unit 1 and 3 were impaled through the chest, and the tips of the lance of Longinus were stuck deep into the ground. But the lance itself was mutable but impervious. It would never bend or break, no matter what pressure, unless it was ordered to shift its form. Unit 2 began to shimmy from side to side, trying to tip itself over. As invincible as the original lance may be, the ground it was fixed to was less able to handle tens of thousands of tons. This was where the extendable arms of Unit 3 could help. The two Avas tipped over to the side with a resounding crash. Everyone winced, waiting for Unit 1 to go active again. Anticlimactically, it remained still. Mayumi wondered at how such a thing could stop something that having dwarf planets dropped onto it. What a weapon! She put her Ava's hands on the prongs and slowly forced herself out of its points. It hurt. Oh, it hurt. Mayumi grit her teeth. Even though her own real fingers grabbed and pushed at nothing, by the time she was done there were 2 bloody holes in her plug suit, the wound staining the LCL around it. Fortunately, LCL itself was hyper-nutritious, hyper-oxygenated goop, and stigmata puncture wounds, unless it was something to the brain, was unlikely to kill her. She gasped one last time as the penetrating point slicked out of inside her. She closed her eyes and took one last deep breath as a scared teenage girl. Unit 3's eyes flashed, and she stood up again, now as a god. Hamagishi, can you see it? You have to cover all those people on their way inside. Mayumi looked up at the sheer mass of the monster island, and this little god felt so powerless again. What? How? Figure it out. Fight it. Make a distraction. Use your field. We're all counting on you. There's no one else. Mayumi let out a little squelched like a balloon losing its contents under pressure. She desperately looked towards Unit 2 and Asuka's still twitching form, but Evangelions and its pilots were tough. Steam was rising in between the gaps of the Red Ava's army. Wait, was Soyu literally trying to burn the poison out? That was possible? She looked out towards the desert, shining a blinding white against the shadow of the monster island above. Almost invisible lasers caressed the dunes. APCs and IFVs weaved around randomly, trying to avoid fire. She watched 2 tanks accidentally crash into each other and then get cut in half diagonally, the air flashing into hot steam and molten metal flooding the crew inside. Still more tried to push through the gap into Tokyo 3. Artillery rained down special smoke, all to try and diffract laser coherence. Rockets slammed into the monster's side just to draw its attention. Unseen beneath the sands of the Great Desert was a great warren of tunnels and staging points. People emerged out of secret exits, rushing towards the geofront, in the hopes that they were too small to be bothered with. Heroes! She lived in a time full of heroes, so she couldn't dare to disappoint. Mayumi ran down the slopes. Alright, AT field magic! Let's do this! She threw her hands out, and a flat red plain spread out across the desert like a sunshade. Lasers splashed against it. The Chinese tanks stopped wasting time with evasive maneuver, and boldly made their way to the city. Hamagishi! Over there! See that big crawler? A portion of Mayumi's screen zoomed into a vehicle just now coming out of a secret bunker in the dunes. It was a massive transport crawler, designed to carry some of the massive components required by NERV's macro-engineering projects. Whatever it was carrying was covered by a white tarp. Your first priority is to get that thing inside the geofront, Misato ordered. The crawler was as massive as NASA's shuttle transporter, able to carry up to 5,000 tons, but fortunately not at such a leisurely pace as 1.6 kilometers. And as the crawler bravely made its way out of the hangar, she could see another one just behind it. The crawler trundled on. It was only about 30 kilometers distant from the arrival site. And Mayumi asked, Wouldn't it be faster for me to just pick it up and go? Can you keep the others covered with your AT field as you do that? It would probably be better if she fought the enemy directly as the all-in-one distraction, someone commented. Sure, that sounds legit, Misato responded. Hang on, an Ava was about, what, somewhere under 30,000 tons? Fighting something like that in the millions of tons. She realised it was probably normal for these people to think that was a fair fight, but she wasn't a native of Tokyo 3, and that was just goddamn insane, and Mayumi prepared to demur politely. She ignored the little part of her brain that noted that Asuka Langley Soyu didn't start as a Tokyo 3 native either. They were smart people. She was sure they had a way to make a much more workable plan.
Look carefully. Can you identify if it has some sort of anus?
Ritsuko Akagi said, in all seriousness. Seriously, you people! The incoming tracked vehicles had to go past dunes, then run up the highways of Hakone, and then into the city beyond. Translators rushed to the loading site to direct the flood of assorted vehicles. Fortunately, their gift of language still applied within the borders of the fortress city. Major Yin Yahui glared as the black and gold Evangelion approached. They had Avas too. Once. The mass production Evangelions was supposed to be the final refinement of the system. The world didn't need gods, it needed controllable weapons. The problem was that behind Nerve was the conspiracy of Seal, and they hijacked all the MP Avas to attack Tokyo 3. Again. And met Shinji Ikari and Karen Nagisa at the same time. That was why China seized the S2 engine on the way to Tokyo 3, so they could create another one of their own with the power of a god. The problem was that Karen Nagisa was still up and about and free, and they had no illusions that just having the power of an Ava would be enough against these inhumanely potent children so expert already at being god-slayers. Beside him, Tao Mu, the special operative of the Ministry of State Security, belted into the seat. The crawler had room for 4 seats, 2 in the front for the driver and radio operator, 2 behind as passengers.
"Do not worry," said the bald man. "If we die in battle, that will at least be a quick death."
What a world it is now we have people who volunteer just for the chance to die.
Pilots of the Air Force were discouraged from reckless behaviour because planes were expensive. If this failed, he pitied them for crashing onto the trackless hot wastes, feeling their bodies alternately cooking in the day and freezing in the night. That it wouldn't be enough to kill them completely, regenerating and waking up in the morning. If they kept walking in one direction, eventually they might find civilization. It could take months of a living hell. Hell was other people, but that didn't mean being alone in your own skin was paradise. Nerve had no goddamn idea what horrors they'd inflicted onto the world when they abandoned it for 2 years. The crawler eased out onto the dunes. The Evangelion raised its arms and continued to cover the approach of the vehicles. The APCs carried armed men, but also plenty of supplies and technicians. After all, if they wanted to seize control of the Geofront, it was best to have everything they needed right then, in case Akagi suddenly triggered the drive that would teleport them all away.
Crawler 1, this is Evangelion Unit 3,
a young girl's voice with an American accent asked through the radio.
Just to confirm, you are carrying the S2 engine, aren't you? Crawler 1 to Nerve Evangelion. That is so,
Yahui replied. He peered out the window to see the cruise missile attacks were, of course, not faring well against the monster island. It could withstand megaton nukes. The piercing ability of multi-mock ship killers were just as futile against the sheer mass it possessed. The monster island roared again, and turned its mountain-sized head down, its mouth opening out again like a flower. Its insides glowed a brilliant blue of star-hot plasma.
Hurrying up now would be good. Oh shit, it's pick up and go time,
Mayumi screamed and began running for them. Yahui winced, preparing for the sudden jerk of the cargo being ripped out of its mountains. He felt instead the sudden bone-jarring jerk of the Ava picking up the whole carrier and carrying it overhead like a plank of wood. He could feel the violent recoil of every step driving up from the floor into his grit teeth. Whoop, 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 whoop. Avas and their pilots weren't living gods. You expected some form of dignity from gods. But before anyone could test if Mayumi's AT field could withstand megatons of hot plasma death too, the monster island recoiled from blasts erupting off its back. Cross-shaped pink blasts.
Angels! Here?
Yahui snorted. Right, they had no idea about that either. Angels were commonplace now. But if they were attacking again...
Multiple blue patterns, what?
They could hear Mayumi's panic over the radio.
Okay, I'm heading back. We don't want any of that.
Major Hui disembarked and was met with a troop of armed men. He made his way unchallenged down deeper into the Geofront and into the golden pyramid inside the underground park-like space that was Nerve's command center.
Major Katsuragi, you have been betrayed. If you are still headed to America after this, know that the Americans will be trying to take over your city.
Behind him, Tao Mu nodded appreciatively. While it was technically possible that they could win this with the men they brought in, if Yahui had still decided to go with the plan, he would have shot the man right in the back.
Huh. Well, that's a surprise, Masala replied. I was almost sure you'd try something to take over the city by now. No offence.
None taken,
replied Talmu.
If the chance is good, then of course one must risk the venture.
This chance was lost. Even if they won the battle on the ground, angels were fighting outside, and if they kept Tokyo free, there was no guarantee China itself would survive the rampage. No, it was much better for the whole thing to be gone, for the angels to be gone, for this cursed power to vanish forever from the world. They tried to excise Tokyo free from the world and failed. Alright then, shift tactics, help them as much as possible and make them someone else's problem now.
If they could get away with it, even I wouldn't have a problem with that.
A ghostly form shimmered to the right.
I'm a nationalist too. Always will I be looking for what's good for my country. It's just that long-term interests first require survival in the short term.
Yang?
Major Yahui gasped.
But you're dead!
Talmu slapped his fist into his palm and bowed. He snickered.
What? Why are you surprised? Don't you know? No one has the decency to stay dead anymore. This is what happens when you don't rush a miracle man,
Yang replied. Even as a ghost, he still looked so tired. People were always dying in mass numbers. If it wasn't for the 2 years of cursed immortality, Yahui would have been so offended this was just more outsiders trying to gain more from the depths and the labour of his people. But this was normal now. The price of victory was always the blood of the weak. Theirs was now a world in which human beings were no longer the super predators, ruler of the planet, but the grazing grass upon which the monsters from the stars chewed to their fill. Angels were arriving in great numbers now. They flew into range as shapeless blobs and featureless humanoid figures, then bubbled out into combat forms. Shells and spines grew. Hooked claws emerged out of long limbs. AT fields flickered in the air, and the bright blue sky above the Gobi desert began to coruscate with overlapping scales. The Tyrannid aesthetic, borrowed from Shinji Ikari's ungodly weird subconscious, was possible because all angels were already strangely mutable in the first place. They practiced self-evolution. But the difference between Adam and Lilith was this. Adam-based life forms sought perfection in form. They were always perfectly optimized to deal with the previous problem. They made their bodies into solutions. The Lilith-based life form, despite its similarities, had a set of solutions, and instead of changing itself, merely applied those solutions in an overwhelming amount. If lasers aren't working, the solution was clearly more lasers. The monster island lacked an AT field, but it could regenerate and create ablative armour to compensate. Then it scraped at the sky with a massive plasma beam like it was Godzilla. Unlike the angels, it lacked a core. Destroy the core, destroy the angel. But it had multiple brains, multiple redundant biological fusion reactors, and a tap straight into the terrified subconscious of all humanity. The monster was literally just rage and spite, embodied in one supreme form. Outside on the view screen, Unit 3 tried to help Unit 2 back to its feet, and recoiled with scalded hands as the Red Ava's whole body was literally now red hot. Mayumi grit her teeth and tried again. She could feel her palms being bursting, scarring in the stigmata response of high synchronization, but she managed to drag the other Ava away from Unit 1 still impaled in inactive form. A pop-up armament building emerged and broke open, exposing her holes. Mayumi began spraying down the other Evangelion with coolant. It didn't help.
Hamagishi!
Asuka growled out.
Soyu! Oh, you're gonna be alright, don't worry. How are you feeling? Like I got a bite taken out of my neck. What do you think? Blech!
She poked at the open wound and the exposed neck cartilage beneath. She could certainly feel the severed blood vessels. It hurt, but she felt worse pains.
Why am I not dead? This should be enough to kill me.
Ritsuko intruded into the channel.
Apparently our plan to take away Lilith had unforeseen consequences. What sort of consequences?
To get a long story short, the Ava pilots were told, you must kill the angels. But then they were trapped, and it was revealed that no, Evangelions are the angels. And then Asuka was a zombie.
This really hurts. Don't try and make me laugh, you assholes.
At some point it seemed like the monster island had forgotten that it was supposed to be rescuing Lilith, and under its inadvertent protection, everyone worked hard to transport as many men and material inside as they could. It wasn't easy. The shutters on either side, Tokyo 3 and the Gobi underground complex, had to close due to the punished shockwaves caused by the Angels exchanging nuclear-grade attacks. They had to time it in between monumental explosions. Trucks wouldn't survive, they'd be blown over. Tanks pulled cargo on sleds. Then the monster island burst open and showered everything beneath with bug-like creatures. Some were little more than walking laser eyes. Others looked like oversized ticks, living tanks. Others like scorpions and bombardier beetles, spitting metal-melting acid. Others were like mosquitoes with barbed proboscis. Soon the valley and the deserts around were just carpeted with living chitin. There was no choice but to finally close and lock all bulkheads. Now the poor fellows still stuck outdoors died messily, as their armoured vehicles were effortlessly broken into. And faint misty souls rose up high. They floated through the air and collected around Unit 1's trapped form, forming a glowing, spinning white ring.
That's probably not good,
Masato murmured.
Ritsuko? Toy box engine is charged. We can go at any time.
Masato licked her lips and felt guilty for a moment about the literally apocalyptic battle going on outside.
Let's get the hell out of here!
And then the sands of the Gobi Desert were replaced with a ring of sand from the Nevada Desert. All the Angels in American airspace stopped whatever they were doing and began converging there.